Hello and welcome to Hank Games Without Hank. My name is John Green. As you can see, the Swoodilypoopers are 5th in the Premier League. We are on 68 points. We have no chance of finishing in the top 2, so we just have to stay in that 3, 4, 5, 6 range for the rest of the season, and then we will be in what are called the playoffs. Now, in the playoffs, we will have to win the semifinal, which is a home and away thing. So, like it's 2 games, and it's like the aggregate score over those 2 games. We got to win that. And then we got to win the final in Wembley. And then if we won that, then we would go to the Premier League. And yay! And if we don't win, then I would probably get fired from my job. And boo. So we will root for me to win. I'm going to talk about my 5 favorite podcasts today. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and I have a lot of favorites. So this is a little bit hard to narrow down, but I guess that I will do it anyway. I listen to like a pretty wide variety of podcasts, I guess, but not that wide of a variety, so I'm always interested in learning about more. So if you have a favorite podcast, please put it in comments so that I can know to listen to it. But just so that just so that you don't write the podcast that I think most of you will be writing, I'm going to say that first. One of my favorite podcasts is Welcome to Night Vale. I think probably the most interesting and innovative thing that I have heard, I guess I can't say on the radio, but like I kind of can because it feels like it's on the radio, in ever. It is fascinating. If you don't know what Night Vale is, then I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to spoil anything for you. I am going to tell you to Google Welcome to Night Vale right away and listen to it and watch your life be transformed, and also your understanding of what fiction can be and do, and what podcasts can be and do be transformed. It's really, really fascinating. And those guys are doing amazing, amazing work. So, yeah, I'm very grateful to them. Oh! Are you kidding me? Leroy Williamson scores occasionally. Leroy Williamson, he scores occasionally, using his head like a boss. I mean, there was no power in that. He's just like, I'm going to let it bounce off my head and go right into the goal. Let's look at it one more time. He didn't even really snap his neck. He was just like, nah, I'll let it bounce off my head. That's brilliant strategy. I wish that I saw that more from him. That was a great goal, and that's just the kind of goal that we need to start off our game against, who are we playing? Hull City. The Tigers. Just kidding. They didn't used to be the Tigers, but then their management renamed them the Tigers, and it made a bunch of Hull City fans mad. All right. So yeah, Night Vale, definitely. Then I'm a huge Radiolab fan, which is a public radio show out of WNYC that covers a wide variety of topics, usually somehow related to the sciences or technology, but it's pretty broad. What I like about Radiolab, and what a lot of people like about it, is that its use of sound, background sound, is really interesting, and they're always kind of trying to sort of paint pictures with sound and make stories, sort of utilize sound in different ways in stories. Sound that in other radio shows would just be considered like a little bit of, like color, a little bit of background noise, really becomes kind of front and center in Radiolab shows. But they also just find amazingly interesting stories to tell. And every time I listen to one of their stories, I just think like, where did they get this stuff? So there's a lot of good episodes. I was going to try to tell you one where to start, but there's just a huge variety of things. There's one called 23 Weeks, 6 Days that's really, really good. And it's a whole hour devoted to one story about a premature birth, and really moving and fascinating, and you cry a lot, but you also learn a lot. But I'm a big fan of the one I think it's called Words, and it's about language, the role that language plays in life, and what life is like for people who don't have language, and that's really interesting to me. That's one of my pet interests, is people who discover language later in life, and I'm not going to talk more about that because maybe it'll end up in a book someday. Oh no! Yes! No! Yes! Oh, green eggs and Fotheringham, making me contradict myself since 2012. Oh man, that was fantastic. Green eggs and Fotheringham. What a keeper. What a keeper. I'll tell you what, I'd like to keep him, if you know what I'm saying. Then I'm gonna go. I also another NPR-based podcast that I really like is Planet Money, which I think is paid for primarily by National Public Radio itself, and is a really interesting. It's an economics podcast, which makes it sound boring, but it isn't boring. It's very much like populist economics and really fascinating stuff. But lots of talk about how one of my favorite series that they did that I talked about in a YouTube video was about cotton in Brazil and how Brazilian cotton manages to be more expensive than American cotton, even though every part of the process of creating Brazilian cotton is cheaper. And it boils down mostly to these weird irrational subsidies, possibly illegal subsidies that the U.S. has. But they've got lots of, there's so much interesting, they're always doing interesting stuff. Like they once bought a toxic asset. You may recall the Toxic Asset Relief Program that the Federal Reserve was part of, and that that in general was an attempt to sort of like save the economy from the disaster of the credit crunch in 2008 and the subprime loan crisis. They bought some of these bundled subprime loans and then spent the next year watching their watching their investment decrease further and further in value. It was really interesting, though. They recently bought some gold, so we'll see how that goes. But it's it's an enjoyable podcast about economics that also really kind of, I guess, humanizes economics without dumbing it down. I'm always interested in things that kind of like don't forego nuance just to be accessible. It's really difficult to do. Like, the obvious way to make your thing accessible is to kind of not be all the way right. Oh, green eggs and Fotheringham having the game of his life. Oh, he's just an absolute beast in there. Yeah, and that's like what the nightly news does, right? Like they forego detail and nuance in favor of like giving you a report of the news that will make sense to a lot of people. I am always interested in ways of telling stories that do not deny the existence, do not deny the nuances, but are still accessible. And that's something that we try to do on the Vlogbrothers channel when we talk about news stories, but it's also something that I think the best podcasts are really, really good at. So I got to recommend that one. Oh! 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 Disappointment. That should have been a goal. I mean, that just had goal written all over it. I think that might have been Wordsworth. I don't know, he couldn't pull it off. That guy, look at Kearney's terrible haircut. Look at that. Meredith, when he turns his head, look at that. Do you like that? Is that Macklemore? Does Macklemore's go all the way to the back? I don't think it does. I don't think it goes all. I don't think it's a full skunk stripe. I think it only goes around the top of his head. I think it's just a tuft. Anyway, you're not going to hear me say anything bad about Macklemore. I think that guy is handsome, talented. It's great to see a ginger succeed. Always makes me happy, no matter the context. So, oh yeah, I was going to recommend more podcasts. I also listen to the Bill Simmons podcast in sports. I have a weakness for sports, as you know. So I listen to this sports podcast that's not always about sports, but it usually is. And I think Bill Simmons is an interesting guy and a smart guy. He has a lot of smart people on the show. Often has writers like Chuck Klosterman or whatever come on the show, and I enjoy that one. Oh God, really good use of the X button there. It didn't work, but I hit the button at the right time. It just always makes me happy when I hit the right button, even if it fails. The last one I'm going to pick is also a radio show, also NPR. I feel like a little bit cliche here, so you guys got to give me better podcast recommendations, I guess. But I still do genuinely love the show Fresh Air. I know that it's like an old person public radio show now, and that like it sounds dated and everything, and it does sound dated in a lot of ways. But I still think Terry Gross is a great interviewer, and she still has on the people I want to hear about. You know. I don't really care to listen to an interview like a 2 or 3 minute interview with a pop star. But I am surprisingly interested in hearing like a 40 frick that everything worked out fine. A 45-minute interview with a pop star, because it's just so much more detail, and you learn so much more about them. So whether she's interviewing, I don't know, Lady Gaga, or she's interviewing a movie star, Seth Rogen, or a poet, or a jazz musician, I just always find the conversation very interesting. I find the flow of the conversation interesting, and yeah. So I listen to that. In fact, I listen to almost every episode as a podcast. When I work out, which, as you can tell from looking at me, I do frequently. I actually do work out at least like once or twice a week, but yeah, you can't tell. Oh no, please let's not give up a 90-minute goal. Look at that, Sylvie. So no, yes. Come on, guys, just get the ball down the field, please. No. Ah, I knew it was coming. I knew it was coming! I know. It's here, your chance of we want points, not gingers. I got it. I get it. You can repeat the pass. There must be a way. Oh, God. How could I have let that happen? Oh, I hate myself. Could it be? No. So much. I'm sorry to the supporters of this great club. I don't know what's happened to us anymore. Best wishes.